And let's turn to the book of Numbers, chapter 30. Sunday nights through the Bible, Genesis to Revelation. And we remember that the children of Israel find themselves camped on the eastern side of the Jordan River, opposite the city of Jericho, which will be the first city that they will conquer in their conquest of the promised land of Canaan. And so they've been just about 40 years, just a little bit shy of it at this point, of getting from Egypt to this particular place. An 11-day journey took 40 years, and that's what an absence of faith and obedience will do to us. But they are situated properly now, and the Lord is just kind of taking care of some final details, preparing them for entering into the land. We pick things up in chapter 30, verse 1. And then Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes, 12 tribes of Israel, concerning the children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing which the Lord has commanded." So, this almost seems kind of odd and out of place, this chapter, in some respects, that in the grand scheme of things, for where they've been and what they're going to do, He's going to talk with them about vows, about keeping their word. And but there's a reason for it, as we'll see a little bit later in the chapter. He said, "If a man makes a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement." So you have a person saying, making a vow, "God, I promise to do this for you." Or it doesn't just include vows to the Lord, but includes vows from one person to another. I'd say to Debbie, "Debbie, I vow to do this for you on Tuesday." So these are the kind of, it's talking about both with God and with men. "He shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." So here you have a man, and because he is a man, and he is, if he is married, he is the head of household in terms of authority by virtue of that. If he is single, of course, he is the head of his household. He is the household. But in terms of a man, if a man took and made a vow to God or a vow to someone else, he was to keep that vow no matter what. There was no moving out from under it, no excuses, no trying to get out from under it. He was to keep the vow that came out of his mouth. Or if a woman makes a vow to the Lord, and she binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth. So now you have a daughter of a father. The daughter is unmarried, so she is still at home, and she is under her father's authority. So she makes a vow now to God, and she doesn't quite have the freedom that her father has for reasons that we'll get to in just a moment. So she makes this vow, binds herself by some agreement. And verse 4, if her father hears her vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, and his silence would be viewed as consent to what she had vowed, then all of her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father steps in, listens to what she vows, and in his wisdom and perspective, he doesn't agree that it's a wise vow, if he can then overrule her on the day that he hears what it is that she says, and then none of her vows nor her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand, and the Lord will release her because her father overruled her. So the Lord's trying to accomplish two things among His people here. He is giving this whole law related to vows, not so that people could make vows and promises and then try and get out from under them, try to look for some technicality to not keep their word. He is communicating to His people that when we give our word, we make a vow to God or to man, we are to keep that vow. Now, we'll stop there, and I run the risk of forgetting my second thought by virtue of doing that, but these are the problems I face. But when we look at God taking an entire chapter talking about our integrity as His people to keep our vows, very, very important. If no one else in the entire nation or world gives their word and keeps their word, we're to do it. Now, you and I live in a country, and we live in a state that will not only not keep their vows in terms of federal and state government, they won't even enforce the laws that they have enacted. This is a significant frustration to me. So here you have a government, national and state level, who pass laws, do not keep the laws, then model before the citizens of the United States that you can make your word, give your word, and then keep it or not keep it as is convenient for you, financially or otherwise, and it's okay. Then we wonder why people then look and say, I'll do it in my own private life. And then our streets are filled with crime. The government, for instance, the state of California, using smoke and mirrors to balance its budget when it is constrained by law to balance its budget legitimately year in and year out. And so we see people that are spending, like the old sayings is like drunken sailors, out of control, and forfeiting the future and all of these kinds of things. And we say, how can you criticize them for it when the government models that for them? So we've got this, we live in a place where even the word of government doesn't mean that much anymore. But no matter who obeys or keeps their vows or not, we are to keep our vows. So this is what the Lord is calling us to do. Now, He is communicating to them, keep your vows. I want my people to be known as people of their word in this world, even if nobody else in the world is keeping their word. He has to do it at the same time of juggling at the same time, protecting the authority structure of the home. And the husband or the father in a home was the ultimate authority. He had ultimate. Not only did he have the privilege of the authority of being the final say on the decisions within the household, but there was a responsibility associated with that. So if his wife, or as we'll see in just a couple of minutes, or his daughter makes a vow and he listens to that vow as the head of the household and he says, that's a nice thought, but it jeopardizes the health of this family. It's not a wise vow that's being made. And because I have the ultimate responsibility for what happens to this family, I overrule that vow for the sake of the family. It might be good for you, but it's not good for this family at this time. So we're to be people of our word, but he was allowing the father, the head of the household, husband, to overrule when necessary from his perspective. God didn't want to kind of destabilize the authority structure of the Old Testament and Christian home. If indeed, verse 6, she takes a husband, so now you have a married woman, while bound by her vows, or by a rash utterance from her lips, by which she has bound herself. If her husband hears this vow and makes no response to her on the day that he hears this vow, then her vows shall stand. So silence was viewed as consent on his part, and her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand. Now this is very good. God knows us so well. So here you got this husband. Okay, you got this dad. And his daughter or his wife makes a vow. And he listens to it and he says, boy, I don't know about that. But, it might be a good vow, might turn out good for us. So I'll just keep my mouth shut. And I won't, say it's good or I won't say it's bad. And nobody will know what. And then if it turns out bad for us, then I'll jump up and, say, no, I didn't say yes or I didn't say no. God comes in and says, no. If you got one time to object to it, and to overrule the vow, and you can't come in later and then try and do something, to undo it a little bit later. So he knows what's in our hearts sometimes, the little games that people can play to get out or around from keeping their vows. So if he listens, he doesn't invalidate the vow immediately. She has bound herself, the agreements that she has bound herself shall stand. But if her husband overrules her on that day that he hears it, he shall make void her vow which she took and what she uttered with her lips, by which she bound herself, and the Lord will release her. So he honors the authority structure within a household. If also any vow of a widow, So she is her own authority structure. So she's not under a husband or anything like that, or a divorced woman, by which she has bound herself, any vow that she binds herself to, just like the man or the single man or the husband, that vow shall stand against her. She's to keep that vow absolutely. If she, another example, if a woman vowed in her husband's house or bound herself by an agreement with an oath, and her husband heard it and made no response to her and did not overrule her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement by which she bound herself shall stand. But if her husband truly made them void on the day he heard them, then whatever proceeded from her lips concerning her vows or concerning the agreement binding her, it shall not stand. Her husband has made them void, and the Lord will release her. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict her soul, her husband may confirm, or her husband may make void. Now, if her husband makes no response whatever to her from day to day, then he confirms all of her vows, can't come back later, and all the agreements that bind her, he confirms them because he made no response to her on the day that he heard them. Again, silence is viewed as consent. But if he does make them void after he has heard them, then he shall. But if he does make them void after he has heard them, then he shall bear her guilt. These are the statutes which the Lord commanded Moses between a man and his wife, between a father and his daughter, in her youth, in her father's house. And so, this, you look and say, wow, he's putting together so many gigantic things before they enter into the promised land, and here he is talking to them about keeping their word. But if he didn't have them keeping their word, and there being honesty and integrity and truthfulness and commitment behind our words, you're going to have anarchy in the nation. There's going to be a terrible reflection upon God. They'd be like all the other nations. And then it would spoil their witness before the world. So, sometimes, don't you look and you see nationally and internationally all the problems that the politicians and different people are dealing with and how big the problems are and everything. And we say, boy, what difference does it make my little life in the world, for God and all in the light of how big these problems are? God knows that there are big problems that have to be dealt with on a national and international level, but He also knows the damage that is done to His reputation, the reputation of His people, by us just not keeping our vows on a daily basis. I can't change the whole world. I'm just a little guy in Modesto, California. So God says, I'll tell you what you can do, Kyle. You can keep your word that you give to people. And then trust me to use that to bring glory to myself. So He gives us all our place where we can make a difference. Chapter 31. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take vengeance on the Midianites, and here's the reason, for the children